Welcome back. You're watching Checkpoint. Thank you for staying with us. Now, in February 2024, world leaders, scientists, and representatives from civil society will gather in Nairobi, Kenya, for the 6th session of the United Nations Environment Assembly. UNEA is the world's highest environmental decision-making body, and the event is coming at a critical time when we are facing the planetary crisis of not only climate change, but biodiversity loss and pollution. Now, to get more info about that upcoming event and the focus on comprehensive solutions to global environmental problems, Linda Koskei joins me in studio. She is the head of multilateral environment agreements at the Ministry of Environment, Climate Change and Forestry. Linda, it's a pleasure to have you with us. Welcome to our studios.
Thank you, Jesse.
Okay, let's talk about UNEA. First of all, it would be proper to break it down for Kenyans, understand what exactly is the big deal about this environmental assembly that will be hosted in Kenya starting this week.
Thank you, Jesse, once more. The United Nations Environmental Assembly, as you said, is the highest level decision-making body in the world when it comes to environmental matters. Therefore, every 2 years, the entire globe meets in Nairobi, Kenya, where we have the headquarters of UNEP to articulate issues that touch on the environment and to come into common solutions on those particular issues. All 193 member states of the UN are members of the United Nations Environmental Assembly. It's the only forum that enjoys global universal membership on environment. That is why it is a big deal. Okay. And three critical roles that the United Nations Environmental Assembly plays is one, it provides the policy guidance in terms of environmental matters in the world. Number two, it provides the overarching policy guidance on environmental matters. And three, it provides the policy direction to take on the environmental matters in the globe. Therefore, this particular year, we have had 5 UNEA forums already, and that is why this particular session, being the 6th session, is called UNEA-6. And therefore, we are expecting about 6,000 delegates to be in Kenya right from today, because the meetings are commenced tomorrow up until the 1st of March.
Yes, well, it's definitely going to be a busy week for the Ministry of Environment and everyone of the stakeholders at large. But let's just get a feel of the progress that we've made as a country. On our end, what laws, what regulations, what programs or strategies have we reviewed so far to reflect Africa's climate action priorities?
The world may remember that last year in September, Kenya hosted the first inaugural African Climate Summit, whereby the summit came up with the Nairobi Declaration on Climate Change and Call to Action. This, as it is known, is the blueprint on climate change action matters in Africa, and it is the reference document not only in the region of Africa, but also in international fora. For example, like in the climate COP28 that took place last year in Dubai. To start implementing the provisions of the Nairobi Declaration, Kenya has done a number of things, including reviewing its laws so that it can be able to align it to the Nairobi Declaration. Last year in 2023, Kenya revised its Climate Change Act to incorporate provisions, especially of carbon markets, amongst others. Kenya is also in the process of developing regulations and is actually in the final stages of finalizing the regulations on carbon markets to implement the Climate Change Act. Amongst many other things that Kenya has also done, Kenya has now, Cabinet has now passed the first national forest policy to provide a framework on forest governance in Kenya. In addition to that, Kenya is currently revising its framework environmental law, which is the Environmental Management and Coordination Act, to gather its regulations. If I may add two more points, to also accelerate Kenya's action on moving from linear waste management systems to the circular economy. Kenya has a Sustainable Waste Management Act together with a policy, and in this UNEA-6, Kenya will be showcasing in a side event that is being sponsored by Kenya on circular economy, to just show the best practices that Kenya has been implementing on matter circular economy and extended producer responsibility. Last but not least, we all know the flagship program by the President, 15 billion trees, tree growing. That is also another aspect whereby Kenya is looking to move its tree cover from the percentage that we have currently to 30% by 2032.
Okay.
Yes, so those are some of the initiatives that Kenya is working on as a build-up to UNEA-6.
So a lot of things in the kitchen, a lot cooking in terms of laws, policies, and whatnot. So it seems we're heading in the right direction, even though implementation is key as well. We'll get to talk about that a little bit later on. But as we talk about UNEA-6, we understand it will seek to deliver resolutions, and it has placed heavy emphasis on cooperation with multilateral environment agreements. Why exactly is this important?
Okay, thank you, Jesse. I may say first that UNEA-6 was preceded by a meeting called the Open-Ended Committee on Permanent Representatives, which took place the week of 19th to 23rd. That was last week. And the member states were looking at the resolutions. The member states come up with the resolutions along the critical areas and emerging areas that they need the globe to address, and then they start negotiating on the same a week before UNEA-6. So when we started last week, we had 20 resolutions and 3 decisions. But currently, after the negotiations, we are at 17 resolutions and 3 decisions.
What's top amongst the resolutions, perhaps?
So some of the resolutions are the implementation of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework on biodiversity. Remember now, this UNEA-6, the agenda is to tackle the triple planetary crisis of climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution and waste. And this is sought to be done through the multilateral action of the multilateral environmental agreements. Actually, the theme of this year is effective, inclusive, and sustainable multilateral action to deal with the triple planetary crisis. Therefore, the MEAs, as we call them, will be showcasing how cooperation is to be done, the contribution that has been done by the multilateral environmental agreements to tackle the triple planetary crisis, and what more can be done on the same. The member states will also be engaging with the multilateral environmental agreements to try and find solutions to the triple planetary crisis. And the solutions are known. What we need to do is to foster unity, to act in a holistic manner, and agree on a way forward on the same through the resolutions.
Well, you're only as strong as your weakest link. So in terms of cooperation between various member states and whatnot, is quite important. And are there recent multilateral environment gains that UNEA-6 will be building on?
Yes, there are. The first one would be the one that I have already mentioned, the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, which the globe agreed upon in 2022 during COP15 on the Convention on Biological Diversity, which seeks to halt and reverse biodiversity loss by 2050. Another one would be the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. This is where we have the COPs on climate change. So building on the gains of COP27 and COP28, especially with regard to the loss and damage fund, amongst others. We also have the Global Framework on Chemicals. Recently, it was called the Strategic Approach to Dealing with International Sound Management of Chemicals. Now we also have a global framework that was agreed upon last year. We will also be building upon the same. Last but not least, in UNEA 5.2, in the last UNEA, there was one of the resolutions was to come up with an international treaty on plastics, and currently the negotiations are ongoing. The next meeting is set to be in April in Canada, and Kenya is also fully participating in the same. So there are many gains that this UNEA is seeking to build upon.
Okay, and we definitely need to plug in members of the public. How exactly can they perhaps plug into the conversation in order to, bring this collective approach sort of application to the issues of climate change when it comes to climate action and whatnot, briefly?
Okay, there'll be many dialogues that will be happening during UNEA-6.
Okay.
First, we had in the last weekend on Saturday, we had the Youth Assembly. So the youth already from the entire globe came together and articulated issues and came up with their own declaration, which they have already submitted. There will be multi-stakeholder dialogues for major groups happening in the same week. The conversations, we will be having the member states also discussing and articulating the issues. We'll be having 33 side events that will be happening in the entire UNEA period. You can imagine the breadth of the thematic areas that will be discussed. The public can also plug in. The meetings are in person, attendance at UNEP, but they'll also be virtual sessions, and also they can plug in using the UNEP social media engagement. So the discussion are wide in nature. On 28th, when we have the Multilateral Environmental Agreements Day, we will have 2 high-level dialogues. On the 29th, when the President, His Excellency, President William Ruto, graces the occasion, we will also have 3 leadership dialogues. And I may also add a number of heads of state will also be in attendance among other delegates.
So it's definitely bound to be a busy week. Thanks for breaking it down in terms of the expectations, what we've done so far in terms of Africa's climate action priorities, and equally the steps that we're taking to make sure it's more inclusive in terms of the youth being involved and all stakeholders as well. We well know this event comes at a critical time when the planet is facing crisis of climate change, nature, and biodiversity loss. So as she's mentioned, for the general public, all official UNEA meetings will broadcast on the official UN website. That was the brief conversation with Linda Kosgei. She is the head of Multilateral Environment Agreements, Ministry of Environment, Climate Change and Forestry. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.